right, we're rolling. We're back. We're in person.
Live.
We are.
It's
in
good.
person.
I know. I kind of missed this. It's been too long actually since we've all gotten together in a
The third dimension.
little
Right.
room, and we can see each other and
Yep.
Yeah.
have the
Smell each
the
other.
real life the real life experience here. Oh man,
Smell
I'm starting
each other.
early.
Just kidding. It's not DEF CON yet.
Yeah, it's summertime. It's
Day,
cooling off
day
now.
3 DEF CON.
Right,
We'll get there.
exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, the gang is back. We're here in person. I love it. We have
Got
a couple.
John in office.
Yeah,
we're
John's
happy.
John's visiting on the West Coast now.
So happy
He's
to
back.
be here.
You like San Diego?
I do.
You don't like leaving?
I don't like leaving.
It's raining, though.
I also like San Diego rain,
Yeah.
which we have.
I don't. So we're okay.
The freeway
Don't like
doesn't.
driving.
Yeah, no, cars don't like the rain in San Diego.
Yeah, that's a whole topic of California driving in the rain.
Different-
We
Oh
could
man,
Different
Well,
spend
all,
hours on that
all the
topic.
oil builds up too,
Yes.
right? So it starts to
Yes.
rain and people just start spinning. It's crazy. It's
Yes.
crazy.
Good stuff. Good
Yeah.
stuff. So we've got a couple interesting topics we can go over today. Some interesting articles we saw out there. Do you guys remember Bitcoin? Remember that whole thing?
I do.
What is that?
Bitcoin. You know,
I
this
think
digital
currency,
currency of
yeah,
some
there you go.
kind.
Some
That was
kind.
this hot thing
It's on
with
the
these
internet, right?
Yeah, what
these
happened?
funny pictures of apes, and now it's not in the news
Right.
anymore.
Yeah, it went away, I thought.
Yeah, well, it's back.
It is
Right.
in an interesting
With a
way.
vengeance.
I know, Sam, you kind of found this article. You want to kind of walk us through this one?
Yes, this one was really interesting to me for a lot of different reasons. But basically, a man named James Zhang pled guilty to 1 count of wire fraud for a scheme to defraud the Silk Road, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, for almost $3 billion in cryptocurrency at the time of seizure. So at the time of seizure, like I said, 3.36 billion. I think today it's a little bit over 1 billion just due to the drop in price. But yeah, this is considered one of the largest digital asset seizures of all time, if not the second largest just financial seizure period.
Yeah,
So
it's up there.
it's pretty big deal. He ended up exploiting the Silk Road through a SQL injection that allowed him to do double withdrawals, all within rapid succession.
Wow.
So
It's wild.
yeah. And this was back in 2012, and that's the first thing that really caught my eye. I was like, this is a 10-year case.
So 2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Wow.
This guy was 22 years
Did
old.
we have
at the
Bitcoin in
time.
2012?
Yeah,
It was still fairly new, but yeah.
Okay.
$5 to $13 per coin at the time.
Was that what it was at the
Yeah,
time?
At the time.
Wow.
So it was valued at close to, I think, like a little bit over $500,000, that's what is so surprising to me is the level of effort considering what it was worth at the time that he stole it.
Right.
Right. It was minimal to what it
was
was
minimal.
like
Right,
a couple
right.
years ago.
Right. So I wonder if just based on
So
that
kind of
growth.
like the return on criminal investment.
Yes. Hey, I
That's
like
right.
this, John. We got to coin that term.
Yeah.
Because in 2012, when I was in the FBI, I was chasing like hacktivists, right? Anonymous and
Right.
LulzSec. I certainly wasn't going after, $1 billion Bitcoin theft.
Right.
Yeah.
that's really cool.
It was still fairly
Yeah.
infancy
Wow.
at that point.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one of the, I guess this guy was rather passive about his, most criminals I know or bank robbers I know, if I know any.
Sure. Back
Let's
to the
talk,
limit.
let's talk after this. I have friends that want to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm sure. Black van outside.
Yeah.
No, I imagine part 2 of the heist would be to get out of here,
Right.
change your face or whatever it is,
Right.
and change your name. But no, he was still in his same home. That when they ran when they raided his home, all the Bitcoin was right there on site. They didn't have to go looking for any part of it. He willfully handed it all over,
Yeah.
and so it
Yeah.
just spoke to me. What an interesting situation.
Yeah, the gig was up. But
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like almost zero, like OPSEC,
Right.
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 which is kind of ironic.
Yeah.
Is
Like,
literally
or-
under his mattress.
Or it's the definition of, conceit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They'll,
Yeah.
they'll never get me.
Maybe a little bit of a guilty conscience thing there too.
we
You
can do
know,
that at
to
play
give up
also.
and
Well, that's what's interesting is I don't know that there's not too much data on how they determined it was him.
Right.
So I wonder how long they were hot on his trail before he even realized it,
Yeah.
or was it really just kind of a last second thing? Because 7 years in, you're probably
Yeah.
thinking I'm out.
you're in the clear at that point. Like it's been a couple
Yeah.
years.
Right.
I mean,
Everyone's more concerned with something else at this
Yeah.
point. Crypto's
Right.
kind of lost some momentum in the news. It's not like the hot thing every day.
Yeah.
So
Didn't
I mean,
get in place.
that's one of the great things about these types of investigations when they finally make the news. Kind of the information gets rolled out in phases, right? So now we're dealing with
Right.
the headline. Next will be the unsealing of the search warrant.
yeah, like what really
Then
happened.
the affidavit, which is going to be, 50, 60, 70 pages long, that's where we're going to get the story.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's where we're going to learn
Exactly how did they
Really
figure
what
it out.
happened.
what they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, and it looks like he made over 140 transactions in rapid succession. So and it's interesting. I don't know how big mixer services were back then, but mixer services can run these things through thousands and thousands of wallets and transactions.
Right.
So I don't think he was using any kind of automated service of that nature. I think
Probably
he was,
ahead of his time in a way.
Right.
You
I
know,
think it was
bleeding edge.
yeah.
Probably very sophisticated, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
for 10 years
Yeah.
ago, right?
And so my guess is it was mostly manually triggered, and so the trail back, with given enough effort, I imagine you can find it, right?
Yeah.
So
file under not a script kiddie.
right,
Right.
right, yes, exactly. So they also found $700,000 in cash, 174 in physical Bitcoin, and then a ton of precious metals, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
He also
He was
had an 80.
diversifying his portfolio.
Right, yeah, just all in one location,
Yeah.
under his mattress.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, yeah, but so they're going to use part of the proceeds to actually pay for the debts of Ross Ulbricht, the original founder of the Silk Road.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? I was like, okay.
Yeah.
It made me think. Like, I guess he earned the money. I don't know.
Yeah, like, how does
You know
that
what I
really
mean?
work?
Like, how
Right,
does he
right.
entitled to that? But okay, and then 2.5 life sentences. I don't think it matters.
Yeah, like you said, John, I think it'll be interesting once more
It
details really come out, and
Yep.
because we only see fractions of the story and bits and pieces. So more to come, hopefully, on this whole
Yeah,
one. So,
yeah. I'm excited to see what kind of details come out of this one for sure.
yeah, and I think we're going to see still a continuation of this type of activity, and crypto theft is still, I think, pretty hot for a lot of
Yeah.
people, and maybe not as hot as other topics, but it's not going to disappear overnight. So I think now it's become a lot more sophisticated, and crypto mining and those types of attacks and different vectors and things like that. So it's in a little bit of a lull, I would say, but
Yeah.
not going nowhere.
It's also very contrary to the original narrative that Bitcoin is quite anonymous.
Right.
10 years later, they were
Right.
able to find who it was that
Yeah.
originally owned it. So
The wallets are still there, and there's still IDs and unique identifiers. It's just maybe takes longer.
right, yeah, I'm of the belief that if he just had marked bills, that would have been harder to find than in this particular situation.
That's
So
interesting.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just
Cash
think
versus
about.
digital. Sometimes that's going to be a whole debate.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
What's the modern cyber criminal going to do?
Yeah, well, hopefully there's some good laundering services on the site that he hacked that he can
Yeah.
probably leverage.
But yeah, definitely as a parting thought, I mean, the damage control might be happening now for the anonymity, of certainly Bitcoin. But I mean, I don't know if that would transfer over to blockchain. But
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah.
good talk.
Good
Yeah,
stuff.
Good stuff.
So another one I think that was really interesting was the Microsoft digital report recently came out. All 100+ pages of it.
Yes.
That alone is very interesting. A 10-page executive report
Yep.
just kind of shows you the depth and breadth of cyber activity and what's happening in today's world, and
100,000%.
some of
Yes.
the interesting stats in that report. I definitely recommend our viewers, go out there, read it, look through it. It's very informational. A lot of interesting stats in there that we can kind of walk through and kind of run through and this and that. So if we pull up, let me get it actually open here.
And while you're doing that, I think it's worth noting, when I speak from the virtual CISO, microphone, as it were.
Sure.
And so whenever I see a report like this, whether it's the Microsoft defense
Right.
report or the Verizon data breach report, I always go for that executive summary because that's who I deal with. I'm dealing with the C-suite, executive leadership for all, a lot of our clients and just across industry. And I come across this one, and the executive summary, Derek, like you said, is 10 pages, which, might come across as, wow, that's going to be hard to digest, right? But as we're about to discuss, they did a really good job of breaking the cyber crime or the cyber threat into different pillars, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they've broken
Yeah.
it down to nation state and all these other categories. So really, it's a 10-page exec summary. but it's really one page for each of the threats. And
Right.
Yeah.
Nation state, cyber threats, network infrastructure, things like that. Yeah.
Because that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Being able to
Yeah.
speak layman, right, to executives about what are the details behind, these cyber issues that we're all facing. So
Yeah. Well,
let's
and
go
it's
for it.
and it's crazy because when you think about Microsoft and the breadth of services and software,
Right.
I can imagine their telemetry as compared to some other organizations out there is probably quite
And they're
quite
optic, right? I
comprehensive.
mean,
Yeah.
they
yeah.
see, they speak from a position of truth,
Right.
in a sense.
Right.
Yeah, if you kind of look at some of their stats from just the Microsoft perspective, right, it was like, 43 trillion signals analyzed, 8,500 plus engineers, 15,000 plus partners they're working with.
70 billion threats blocked.
Yeah, so they see a lot of traffic, you put it that way, right?
I think it's
Put lightly.
It's a safe statement on a very
So-
thick branch.
So I mean, to be honest, right, Microsoft does see a lot of the traffic out
Yeah,
there and what they do.
they
So
do.
there's a lot of truth into what they truly see, and to see some of the stuff that they're coming back with on, the state of ransomware is growing like crazy, the business email compromises, IoT devices out there. It's kind of like mind blowing to see some of these stats and what they see. Trying to find here some of the more interesting ones, right?
Well, I think one that sticks out to me, it was a few of these stats are validating.
Sure.
Right, to like what we already know. 50% of Microsoft cybersecurity recovery engagements are related to ransomware.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Which validates everything that we talk about,
Yeah.
right, in this space, or a lot of what we talk about, not everything. But yeah, ransomware kind of rules the day still. And this report's dated 2022.
Yep.
So there is a high degree of currency, or
Yeah, it's not trending backwards, right?
No.
It's still trending in the upwards directions, which I think we all know. We
Exactly.
see it. Some of the interesting things around the industry in that, manufacturing is a pretty high percentage of targets. Consumer retail is another big one. Healthcare is about a 20%. So kind of like, those 3 or 4 sectors are rather large, and what considers and, kind of how ransomware operators target everything. Another interesting slide in here I think is really good for people to understand is, how the whole ransomware kind of economy really works. It's not just like one team of people. It's usually several affiliates and kind of
Yeah.
groups working together.
the enterprise.
I think a lot of people don't really maybe understand that the cyber organization side of things and how it's really run like a business. And, one team is responsible for getting access and selling access. Another team is, like the actual affiliate and creating the malware and the
Crafting
ransomware,
payloads,
the
yeah.
payloads.
Yep.
The others to help, extort the money and actually negotiate. And the other one kind of just oversees the whole thing. And so it's interesting how when you kind of see it in a very clean chart, that's like, oh yeah, it's not just, like if I get rid of one group, like now you see why one group equals like 10 more underneath it.
I mean, the
Right.
term criminal enterprise.
Right.
It's
That's
not
exactly
just a
what it
cute
is.
title. It
Yes.
actually has
Yeah.
some meat behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the industrialization of this industry is really prevalent. It always makes me wonder about the heads of these organizations, honestly, and how they cooperate with each other. Because, they all, I imagine, have their own incentives. But
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? So
I talked about the different categories, right? They've broken it down. Microsoft has kind of chunked out the cyber threat by nation state, devices and infrastructure,
yeah.
cyber influence operations, and then cyber resilience. So, I mean, how the heck are we going to chunk this out for this discussion?
Right.
Right. There's so much to digest, right? And I think for most of our viewers, they're probably going to fall under more the devices and infrastructure and kind of cyber resilience on maybe some
Right.
things that, tips and takeaways and tricks and things like that. I mean, I think we all know, like nation states exist, and,
Yeah.
and I mean, John, you have some experience kind of working with
Yeah.
that, and
It's hard to take
you
that hat
know,
off, right?
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of complexity that go into that, and I know the governments are kind of working on almost these ransomware summits and information sharing, which is a different article we kind of touched upon there, but it all kind of ties together, right? And I think a lot of the stuff that we see in this report is still a lot of the cyber basics and hygiene that people need to be doing, like those basic things we always talk about, and what tooling and best practices around, MFA, principle of least resistance, and or escalations and things like that, all tie in together to give you a better cyber hygiene overall.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the points that I saw in here that Microsoft stated that confirms so much about what we've talked about here in this podcast is, I quote, "The most effective defense against ransomware includes multi-factor authentication, frequent security patches, and zero trust principles across network architecture."
Where's our little buzzword bingo?
Right.
Yeah.
Their
That's
little
3 of
bell.
I
them.
thought you were going to have a
Yeah.
Where is that sound?
One day we'll get it.
Yeah, right.
Somewhere over there.
But how validating,
Yeah.
we already
Yeah.
knew these things, but it's just to hear Microsoft say that, look, based on everything that we've gathered, these still prove to be the best controls to have against this type of attack.
Basics go a long way, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's such a long way in so many domains of life, but here specifically, I think it really applies. Yeah.
Which really speaks to the value of a report like this from a reputable source like Microsoft. When I talk about vCISO and kind of what we're doing here with Triden Group,
Sure.
And our customer base, present and future, it really is. It's a lot about leveraging this type of information and Sammy, what you're talking about, and speaking the truth to executives. Right? And you just listed 2 or 3 checkbox items that we should all be doing, right? And yet here's another source telling us do these things. And I know a lot of it is easier said than done, but really this is where we need to be, really breaking down threats like this into simple must-dos, must-haves, as far as security foundation. So I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Another interesting one in there, they said, key among those lessons is that cloud provides the best physical and logical security against cyber attacks and enables advances in threat intelligence and endpoint protection that have proven their value in Ukraine. So using Ukraine as kind of like the guinea pig or the sample, they found that organizations that have hybrid infrastructures or a large cloud presence on average were far more resilient to cyber attacks than those that didn't.
But why is that because of they're more agile, right? We can make changes on the fly from a security point of view? Why?
I think there's a couple things at play. So I think there's always that caveat, like, yes, with the asterisk of if you turn things on. So, like, in my opinion, when you go to a cloud provider, and we'll just use Microsoft in this case because we're talking Microsoft, is you instantly have access to a lot of new technology, tooling, things that you can just license, turn on, and enable versus building your own stack, deploying your own tool sets, and you can just consume from them. So assuming you deploy things correctly, turn things on, then just by default, you're going to have a better, in theory, kind of cyber resilience to certain things. Obviously, if you misconfigure things, things can still go wrong.
Sure.
But if you kind of look at take an old school, company that's still running mainframes, for example, right? I mean, they're out there. They have a lot of technical debt. They can't go deploy some of these advanced, more best practices, and because, the app will break.
Yeah.
And your business is so stuck using this. Yeah. So it's always my theory is like if you're more modern kind of company applications and things like that, by nature you can kind of build in more security controls day one. Like we talked to some companies where it's like, they recycle services on serverless compute. They run for 6 hours, so if they do get breached, they're already recycled and things like that.
Yep.
Whereas you have some people that are like, well, you can't patch that because it can't be down. It's like, when was the last patched? Well, I don't know. Like, well, how scary is that? So in my opinion, I think by default, you have access to better tooling, and you're more inclined to take the risk of patching, doing those things that you should be doing. So.
Right.
Yeah, and you're not boxing yourself into some legacy situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens, a lot, right, with what we see. And, patching was a big part of this article as well, and things like that. And, blocking lateral movement, MFA. I think one of the interesting things too about MFA that we're seeing now is like MFA fatigue, and people just abusing that because they know hey, I know this company or this customer has MFA. I'm just going to keep sending you the request, and eventually you're just like, whatever, and you click yes on accident, or you're just like, I don't care.
Yeah, that's a good point. The accidental.
It's an interesting mindset now people are getting into.
It is.
Yeah, and then going back to the cloud thing too, just the inherent nature of the responsibility model, right? They're not having to deal with XYZ thing all the way up to basically the data and user controls. So, not to say that those controls don't need to be granularly tuned as well, but you're dealing with a far less broad scope than if you're running everything locally.
Yep.
And I think maybe it was Dell's report or IBM had a report that said hybrid environments are actually the least cost intensive, or the when in terms of a breach, incur the lowest costs. And I think that's because of the replication between the two, the
Yeah.
two environments.
That
So,
makes sense.
you know, and
Which is what we see too, is we see most people doing a hybrid / multi-cloud type of gig, right? So depending on what it is, you know, not to kind of go into design or whatever, but sometimes cloud doesn't always make the most sense for certain things.
Yeah.
It does in a lot of cases. So you got to kind of know that audience and your target, and maybe cloud makes more sense for just offloading and protecting backups, but it's cheaper or more effective because you have a highly specialized compliance or app or
right.
things like that, right? But either way, like, it just proves that cloud's not going anywhere. Like, we do know that there's different approaches to securing cloud than you do on-prem. Is a very different approach, because cloud is kind of like, you can't see it, you can't touch it, it's kind of everywhere. And whereas if I have a server, I can physically kind of see, I know my firewalls are there, and it's this whole weird principle people have of like protecting the servers and whatnot, but you know, those walls are long gone.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Funny though that you know, a lot of what we're talking about around the foundational controls. You know, here we are, early November, and we just finished October, right? Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and how not even ironic, but how relevant that the core fundamentals that were being pushed by CISA this year were like multi-factor, strong passwords, patching.
Yeah.
You know, phishing
Just shows
awareness.
that those basics go a long,
They do.
long
They do.
way.
And they are not to be ignored.
No, I mean, I think we also get to a point now where some people take those basics really serious, and they have a very mature cyber model, and they're getting to more advanced, you know, things around DLP and PAM, and kind of really increasing their model. And some are still in that infancy stage, right? And I think with more regulations and scrutiny and awareness training to this whole thing, like, people are now, I think, waking up to be like, yeah, I need to take this serious. Because insurance carriers are now kind of pushing back too. I mean, a lot of cases we see are
100%.
Hey, I have to do this because my insurance says so. Great. I'm glad they are.
Right.
Honestly.
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, to kind of wrap that thought up, CISO statement, right? We're by paying attention to these fundamentals, we can move more from the reactive to the proactive.
Right.
And so I think that should always be the goal. That should always be the underlying theme of a strategic roadmap.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
a good point. Let the compliance kind of drive and
let's
dictate
get that
everything.
proactive state as quick, as I don't want to say as quick, but as methodically as we possibly can.
Right.
Put ourselves in the best position to be defendable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's always going to be something to do, and, you know, just making small steps, you know, a little bit here and there is just start.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Baby steps.
Yeah, I wonder, you know, it always makes me think, like, how much of those companies that are so far behind everybody else is just due to just skill and labor shortage, you know? I just see it myself all the time on engagements where it's like they have these legacy systems and they got 2 guys that are managing the whole thing. And they're like, look, even if we had time to actually go in and fix this, like, we don't even know where to begin.
Well, again,
you know?
right? Reactive, lack of a roadmap, lack of a strategy.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of those factors feed into that situation you're describing.
Yeah. And usually all that falls onto those 2 people who are
100%.
not only the strategy but the tech, right?
100%.
So it's
I would actually argue in a lot of those cases, unfortunately, that stems from the leadership of the company. Not taking it serious to be like, like, we don't need to do this. Like, I don't want to spend the money.
Yep.
Well, hasn't been an issue yet.
I'll take the risk. We've seen plenty of cases where people take that risk and then it bites them. And dang, like, I should have done this. Like,
What I've always called monetizing security.
Right.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Totally.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think another one we can kind of maybe wrap up with was, you know, again, kind of the whole ransomware conversation. You know, really, several governments are kind of getting together to kind of really, you know, how do they fight ransomware? How do you kind of share intel? You know, and just making it more easier to kind of share the access and you know, the information out there, because it is called a global issue, right? It's not just, you know, one particular industry or nation. It's
agnostic.
It's a pandemic in itself, honestly, if you want to use that term.
Right.
So I think it's a good idea on, you know, really sharing this type of information and, you know, what type of access people have and things like that across, you know, borders, if you will.
Yeah, and it looks like they're going to launch the initiative sometime early next year. Start out of a fusion center operated out of Lithuania's Regional Cyber Defense Center. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that kind of cooperative coming together. But again, to your point, I think it's a necessity as we see the different criminal organizations working together to provide each other different capabilities to execute these things. So I think it's only natural that we have an initiative like this that's kind of
I think there's a constant quest, right, to what's the most bilingual or multilingual messaging around cybersecurity.
Right.
How can we get everybody on the same page? And I think right now, again, going back to ransomware, that is something that resonates.
Yep. Top of mind for a lot of people.
It is, because that is monetizing security. And I think what we're referring to here with the global efforts, it looks like the White House just wrapped up a 2-day ransomware summit. Where the net nut of that discussion was a new threat sharing initiative,
right,
around kind of what you're talking about, Sammy. How can we pool our resources and our intelligence and our know-how and our skill sets to really fight this on a global scale?
So John, let me ask you, from your kind of background with the FBI, like, do you think they should include kind of public and private sector? Is it kind of better off in its own silo? Should it be shared?
No, 100%. If you look at the greatest hits, even in the last 2 years of ransomware targeting, right? It is completely agnostic. There is no discriminating.
Yep.
Municipalities, public government, been targeted. Industry, private, commercial, been targeted. So this is a threat across the board that I think involves, or requires, I should say, like all of our thought leadership, all of our experience to really try to figure out like what is the best way to remediate and mitigate this issue.
Yeah, and if all the data is siloed in everybody's own facilities, it's like, how are you supposed to make deductions across global regions? I don't see any other way of combating it when you consider their level of cooperation on the other side of that in the criminal enterprises. If we don't cooperate at the same level, it's only...
That's a great point, right? I mean, like the criminals, the bad guys, they're banded together.
That's right.
Absolutely.
They're definitely cross sharing on the backside.
Totally.
How foolish would we be to not do the same?
Well, and that's why I made my comment earlier.
Yeah. Well, that's on purpose. See, I know what I'm doing.
And that's why I made that comment earlier. Is like, I wonder who the heads of these groups are. Like, do they get together for coffee as well, and have these conversations and orchestrate deals? Because I imagine so. And especially if one group is far more capable at a certain pillar than another.
Well, they meet at the dark web cafe, right?
Right.
So,
right.
Zoom meeting.
All good talk happens.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or bad talk in this case.
But it makes sense, right? I mean, I think from a public and private sector, they see different things, right? And they see different kind of aspects of it, and sometimes some people see more bleeding edge in the attacks and the craft, and some people see like the larger scale. So, it makes perfect sense to work together and form a coalition, if you will, and it just makes sense from the greater good of the world cybersecurity state, in my opinion. So
yes.
To that point, everything can be traced back to, I don't want to say human nature, but like if you look at history, like even before 9/11,
sure,
the FBI was constantly under attack with the CIA and all the other members of OPSEC, right, the U.S. intelligence community, because we were operating, on appearances anyway, in silos.
Right.
So information wasn't being shared. If you look at the state of investigative activity now, here we are 21 years later, we have task forces, there is cohesion, there's a lot of collaboration, right, as a result, of that horrendous act, right? And so, we keep talking about, or I keep talking about over the last few years, like what's going to be the cyber 9/11, that creates this situation where we have essentially cyber task forces. Well, we're there.
Yeah, it's right there, I'd say.
We're there. And so, I think this is just another step in that direction, right now. So it's like, all the financial loss that we're experiencing through ransomware is about as close as we maybe going to get.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Maybe it is a culmination of events, right?
right.
That really kind of hits it off. I think
Many paper cuts.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah.
even Colonial in and of itself
Yeah.
was
Right.
almost like a big enough kind of.
It's a big wake up call for a lot
yeah,
of people,
I think
you know,
so.
especially
Yeah.
now, like people are kind of like on edge just in general, and
Yeah.
just takes one like power issue or
Yep.
grid issue or
Well, it's
another
when-
water issue, and it's like,
It's when a cyber activity takes place that affects people in a very non-digital way.
That's
Exactly
right.
right.
That's
what
right.
needs to happen. That's what's
Yes.
happening.
Yeah.
Definitely agree with that. Sadly, you know, like that's a whole conversation for
Right.
another
It
show,
is.
but we
It
can
is.
dive into a
But what a
specialty
great
on
point,
that.
because often, unfortunately, the cases that the legislatures don't understand, but they do understand people not getting gas or people not able to get to their homes
Exactly.
or power grids getting shut off.
It's that physical,
you're
tangible
speaking
thing.
their language exactly. So it makes sense. And I hope we don't have to get to this some kind of D-Day event for these task force to really get into full force. But yeah,
Sweet. Doom and gloom. Just kidding. No, we're all good.
doom and gloom. Well, it's
We
just
don't operate in
the
FUD.
barrier that's another good point though to make. Is just like the barrier to entry for attackers and hackers is just so low nowadays.
Yeah.
It's just
I
like
think that's the difference.
yeah.
Cybercrime as
Yeah.
a service. It's in, I mean,
Right. So we need
go
to
read
make
the report.
cyber defense something that you can use as a service, right?
Yeah.
Something that as easy to consume as the hackers can their ransomware.
Yeah, I think companies are really trying to do the right thing and build these types of programs and these solutions out there. And like to me, it's really cool to see like what's upcoming, what's new, and a lot of really smart people out there are building really cool stack and software to combat very niche parts of cybersecurity.
Right.
But
Totally
at the end of the day, do those like 4 or 5 basic things, and you'll be at a much better
Massive difference.
level
Yes.
than anybody else. So
Yeah, and training and user awareness training. We didn't say that earlier. That's another buzzword. Ding, ding, ding.
Yes.
User awareness training.
yeah,
Exactly.
that's
User
true.
awareness training,
Start
for
with your
sure.
training.
Yes.
Start with the
Big believer.
users. Phishing's a big one. Business email compromise is a huge
Still.
one in that report.
Yes.
We'll make sure we put links to everything in the show notes.
Love it.
Absolutely.
Any closing thoughts, gentlemen, before we wrap up?
No, I think we killed it. Yeah, I think it was good.
Yeah.
Patch your systems if you can.
Yeah, I mean,
It's-
my thought would be just the fact that we had so many headlines to cover
yeah.
is indicative of the world that we're living in now.
Yep.
Right? And so the next time we get together, there's probably going to be even more headlines.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
But yeah, just eyes on the ball. Let's just keep paying attention to what we're doing and always moving forward.
Yep.
That's what
Yeah.
we're here to help you do.
Stay
I love it.
vigilant.
stay cyber vigilant. Yep.
Yes.
Become that human firewall, if you will. So,
That's right.
all right, gentlemen, appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek.
Make
Thanks,
sure you
Sandy.
guys like, subscribe, follow, send us some comments, and talk to everybody soon. All
Awesome.
right, take care. Bye bye.
Bye,
Cue
guys.
outro music.
We're working on that.